Hello and welcome to the Commission Files. I'm Will Leach.
I'm Kerry Gregg. Hello. And we're back in the cosy and familiar surroundings of Studio 2 at Commission Christian Radio in Dundonald.
Now, we know you could be listening anywhere, all over the world in fact. So a big thanks to all our international listeners for checking us out.
Thus far, we have listeners all over the UK and Ireland, but also Canada, United States, Germany, Italy, Norway, Spain, India, Australia, even Sierra Leone.
I actually looked it up. Nearly 30 countries and territories, around 250 cities. So hello everyone, thanks for listening and thanks for walking along with us.
And you are why we are thinking about how Christians from all over the world can go on journeys together, walk alongside each other and benefit and grow as a result. We have two guests just made for Studio 2 sitting here, both from Tearfund Northern Ireland, Director Chris Thompson and Tearfund's Church and Supporter Engagement Team Leader Lois Baillie. Hello to you both.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hi Chris, hi Lois. Welcome to the Theatre of Stories and Classroom of Insights that is Studio 2 here at Commission. We've invited you both because of churches here in Northern Ireland who've made their own connections, partnerships with other churches or groups of churches in other countries to the benefit of both partners.
Chris, explain to us what Tearfund wants to do with partnerships.
I think most Christians here in Northern Ireland understand that the church has an obligation to those living in poverty, but sometimes that can be at arm's length, and so we lose something when we're not connected with those that we are supporting. So partnerships is simply a way of reducing that gap, of bringing us closer to those that we want to love and serve and support. And in doing so, as we'll discuss, I'm sure, there's real learning and growth and benefit to both parties.
I think a lot of churches probably find it slightly daunting. So why is it vital that they actually get involved in something like this and do this?
We are part of a global body, the church. That's true here, it's true in some of the places you've mentioned, right across the world. And the contexts are different. A Christian worshipping on a Sunday here in Belfast is going to maybe look and sound and feel quite different to a congregation meeting in Chad or in Rwanda or Pakistan. But there is a unity that, as Christians, we believe comes from the gospel. And so if our giving is disconnected from those we are giving to the church who are serving the poor in their community, then we are only doing half a job, and we're missing out on something much richer.
Lois, you've travelled, you've seen partnerships. Does that answer work for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's something about really investing in a partnership and investing in other people to the point where you can share and celebrate with them and walk alongside what's happening in their community as much as they encourage you about what's happening in your own community and your walk.
Well, before we ask you both anything else, we're going to hear from two people. First, one from Northern Ireland, Helen McNeely, who led a partnership team just like this at Knock Presbyterian Church in Belfast in this case. They partnered for quite a few years with an Anglican diocese in Uganda in a place called Muhabura. Now, we chatted to Helen on Zoom, and here are her thoughts.
We deliberately entered into a medium-term partnership to give us the benefit over a number of years of getting to know our partners. And so that developed some really rich relationships with Christians in a very different context. So we got to learn all about what it was to be a Christian in their context. God is the same God regardless, and yet Christians are called to be Christians in very different places. And so just looking up and being part of the wider Christian church, the global Christian church, which was just an incredible experience for both those who visited, but also those who met our Ugandan friends when they came to visit us in Belfast. But I think also one of the big benefits was just seeing the impact of poverty. Our partnership was very much around being part of a project that helped local Christians seek to lift themselves out of poverty. So to have that benefit was just an unbelievable privilege for us as a church. The bishop reminded us that we had access to resource and knowledge. But what the partnership gave us was a richness in terms of seeing the depth of their faith and their dependence on God in a way that we don't, because we have all the resources and we think we're so independent. But to see Christians genuinely understand what it meant to rely on the Lord and to rely on his provision and his goodness honestly, we learned so much more from that than what we gave to it.
Helen McNeely there. Let's hear now from Bishop Cranmer Magisha himself from Muhabura. Been something like 37 people from Knock who visited his diocese, and he's visited Belfast many, many times.
We really appreciate God so much for this partnership that God started, and we share the faith and we talk about Jesus Christ and we encourage each other. To me, it meant a lot in my life as an individual, but also it strengthened me in the ministry, because ministry is done through interactions and we behave as if we are brothers and sisters.
Bishop Cranmer Magisha there, the retired Bishop of Muhabura.
Lois, that's one partnership by way of example. Are there many other churches here that do that or have done it?
Yeah, we've got a number of partnerships with churches and have done over the years. That example specifically with Knock is probably quite a unique example, both because of the length that it spanned over 10 years of partnership, and also just the level of personal relationship and the visits that took place. With all the partnerships we have, there's varying levels of relationship and partnership that's developed, and we really do that working alongside the church. So for Knock, it was really important for them to have a personal relationship, to really look at the vision that they had as a church for mission and how they could be part of alleviating poverty as part of that. So with any partnership that we have, we work alongside the local church here in Northern Ireland, look at their vision as a church and what they hope to achieve out of the partnership, and then work together to see what we can make possible with that.
Let's explore that a little bit. Chris, you heard Helen say we got far more out of it than we put in, even though that particular church put in quite a bit of money over the time of the partnership. But that isn't really what it was about. So looking at both ends of the partnership, both partners as it were, what does each get?
Obviously, the generosity in terms of resource is really important, and particularly when it's done through Tearfund's model of equipping and training churches to release people and to see people release themselves from poverty. That goes a long way, and that kind of money is multiplied. But it's only part of the picture. And the church on the ground in the place that we are partnering with is blessed by the sense that they're not on their own, that they're part of a global body, and the commitment that people in another place are praying for them as they serve the Lord and seek the kingdom in their community is really profound for them. But for us, and I suppose this is, as a Northern Irish person, this is part of what excites me even more, the same blessing exists. And Helen shared it really well. It's profound when we begin to see and understand what it's like for people to live in poverty and what's required for people to lift themselves out of poverty, and the role of the church within that. We begin to see the world through different eyes, through fresh lenses, and not just far away parts of the world, but actually we begin to see our own lives and the life of our own community and the mission of the church here in Northern Ireland in a different and a fresh way. And so it unleashes possibilities in a fresh way for us.
Could you just sort of do a wee brief overview of what Tearfund actually, or who they are?
Brilliant, yeah. So Tearfund's a Christian international development agency. We work in around 50 of the poorest countries in the world. Maybe what people best know us for historically is response to emergencies. So there'll be a crisis around the world, an earthquake, a conflict, a flood, and you'll see something on the news or in your post saying respond. And that's really important, and it's life-saving, and it is designed to just keep people alive. But it's not long-term change, and the long-term change is what excites us the most. That's our bread and butter, is seeing communities lift themselves out of poverty. And where almost always for Tearfund that partnership is with the local church. I could spend a long time talking about why that is, but just only the church is well equipped to bring holistic change to a community. Poverty isn't just a physical lack; it actually spreads spreads itself into the whole life of a community: our heart, our spirit, our body, our social interactions, and so on. Only the church can deal with that. And so Tearfund works primarily through the local church. Our model is to see people trained and equipped to release themselves from poverty. And so it's not always glamorous. It's not as exciting as building a school or purchasing tractors or whatever else. sometimes that's really important. But it is about seeing the church catch a vision for what's possible when they engage their community in holistic change and holistic transformation, and we see that bring real change, long-term change to communities across the world.
I think that's so important, because the traditional view is very much we give money and you're sorting it out. Basically, it takes away our guilty conscience, really, that there's the poverty out there, and really what can we do here because we're not there. But at the end of the day, it's really important to know what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so whenever you are asking for donations and money, then we know what it's going towards, and actually maybe realistically take away that guilty conscience from us too, because we know that we all can't be doing, and there's specific rules for people. So whenever you're doing that now, in what way are you enabling the churches to do this then?
So Tearfund's model is something we call church and community transformation, which just captures that the church is central, and when it reaches out and catches a vision for a changed community, then transformation happens. So I can tell you a couple of stories. I can tell you a load of stories, but a year ago I was in Chad. I visited a community that had caught this vision about 8 years ago. So Tearfund had come, supported the local pastor and one or two key people to understand that the church has a responsibility and an obligation and a joy of bringing change, of dealing with poverty. In Chad, 1 in 5 kids die before they turn 5. And the church said, well, we can do something about that in our area at least. So I travelled there. 8 years had passed. I visited a place where they were food secure. So they had sorted out their food problems. They had changed how they grew, what they grew and where they grew it through training. They were water secure, so they had dug solar-powered wells and manual wells for irrigation and for drinking. They built a church. The community together had built a church because they understood how important that was, so they weren't meeting in the open air. And they built schooling, so every child up to 15 was being educated, and the families had resources to send their kids to school, which is another part of that picture. In fact, when I travelled there last year, they had sent 67 young people to university in the last 5 years, including 14 young women. So holistic, long-term transformation. And it went back. The starting point was the church catching a vision for its responsibility to bring change. And it had totally transformed that community.
That's wonderful to hear. Really is.
Lois, I've got a question for you, but before I ask it, we're going to just very quickly listen to a Tearfund video which makes this point very well. Now, a lot of the Tearfund video, which is brilliant, by the way, is subtitled, so we have provided some of the voices for you so you can understand the interaction. It's very clever, and it's actually quite funny.
This is Burundi in Africa. And this is Cecile, who's walking to fetch water for her family.
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Well, then what's in the bucket?
This is my business.
This is the school that your donations built, brick by...
Wrong again.
Oh, then who built it?
Our parents.
Of course. Your generous donation.
Nope.
Ah.
We built it.
This is the centre of the community that your donations... No, it's not, is it? Okay, what did Tearfund do?
Something more important than any building.
Uh-huh.
Through the church, Tearfund helped teach and train us all.
Oh, well, that's much more helpful.
I think he's starting to get it.
We learned a little bit, and regular listeners will know this, about church community transformation because we interviewed Diane Holt of Thrive Ireland about doing it here. This is about doing it overseas. There must be an awful lot of training and teaching. What's the starting point to help a local church work out how it's going to do that kind of thing for its own community?
The starting point is really starting right in the local church and investing in kind of how they engage with mission. And I think for the start of the CCT journey is engaging, first of all, how are we looking at mission and how can we look at mission in a really holistic way and an integral mission mindset of not just looking at the spiritual needs of those in our community, but looking at all the needs that exist and identifying those and having a heart for those. And that's just what happens around the world where we look. They first look to the local church and spend a great time investing in the church and the church leaders and any facilitators that are going to be involved, looking at the Bible and looking about how they can look out wider to the needs in their community. And I heard a great quote from a colleague recently in Nigeria who said, the church is the solution because it's the entry point and it's the sustainability plan. So that time that goes into the church at the beginning and investing in them as they then go out and reach into the community and discover what needs exist there, they're building a real plan for the future then and looking back to the Bible at each stage of that.
How do you make that happen though? Because you're going to get people who are going to say, oh, you want to do Bible studies, we want to do this for the community, we want to do that, we want to feed these people, we want to educate these people, we want to do it now. Why do we have to sit and study the Bible? So there's probably a tension, isn't there, at the beginning of what's our focus here and what's our starting point and what's our motivation?
Yeah, of course. And I think there needs to be a little bit of patience involved with that. But I think having kind of your heart and your will activated to where you want to go is going to keep you focused on kind of acting as a result of those Bible studies. So you want to always be seeing actions and outcomes as a result of what you're learning and studying together.
Mm-hmm. How do you find the partners to work with in Northern Ireland?
So we're interacting with churches really on a daily basis. It's kind of part of our bread and butter, connecting with churches and how they can support Tearfund and kind of work with global poverty. So it can happen just in daily conversations as churches seek to develop their mission strategies, or it can be something that we promote and then people can respond to that. So it happens really in both ways.
A relationship's very important in that situation. It's key, isn't it?
Absolutely. You can't do it without starting first from a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about relationships, how do you actually make them happen across X thousand miles between community of believers here and a community of believers somewhere else? What does it actually look like? You know, people say relationship and then they're thinking in practical terms, week by week. What does that mean?
Yeah, it can look a variety of ways, really, depending on the church and the partner. So obviously, Knock example, they had a lot of visits to go and actually see the work on the ground and be part of that and support each other in that. That's not always for everyone, but there are ways of building a relationship without that element of travel and just turning it into something that's more connected with one another rather than just a transactional process. So different ways that we would do that is perhaps connecting churches locally with the partner that they're connected to through Zoom. So simply just having ongoing communication with one another where they can hear what's happening both locally and where they're supporting the work and sharing praise points, prayer points, and just spending time together, and we can facilitate that for them. Other ways are we can travel and have visits that aren't a whole church going out, but we would offer opportunities maybe for church leaders across different churches that are supporting work. For example, a collection of churches supporting work in Rwanda. We might organise a trip where some then church leaders or key members of a congregation can travel and do it that way.
You're listening to The Commission Files with Kerry and Will. We need to take a quick break.
The life of a tacksman in the first century was not a happy one. There was plenty of money to make, required by all means, fair or foul. But for one tax collector, Matthew, son of Alphaeus, all this was to change.
He's coming over.
Matthew, son of Alphaeus, leave your work and follow me.
No, Matthew. Don't!
Good grief, he's gone.
Matthew became a follower of Jesus that day. Matthew the Scribbler, some called him, but these notes were special.
And someday I'll come back to write my book about Jesus and the good news of the kingdom. People all over the world may read it before Jesus comes back. For he will come back someday. I'm sure of it.
The story of Matthew, 13 episodes from the Commission drama team. You can hear this series and a new series every month from the same place as you found the Commission Files. Just search for Commission Radio Drama wherever you get your podcasts.
You're back with the Commission Files, and we're chatting with Chris and Lois from Tearfund, Northern Ireland. Would you find that someone, especially, well, I'm thinking of young people who see so many things on the TV and can nearly become immune to what they see, when they're actually in the situation, can those rose-tinted glasses maybe come off all of a sudden and see this is what it's really like?
Yeah, I think it's definitely always going to be a challenge. There's something different about what we expect to see and then the reality of that in front of us. I think for me, my personal experience has always been almost the opposite way around, where I've actually found the culture shock and maybe it more of a challenge as I re-enter from visiting somewhere where poverty exists and then returning home and seeing how we live in a culture and society where we're so discontent and we are constantly striving for more after just visiting and being part of this culture where people are so thankful and still so generous with what they do have. And so it can be a little bit of a struggle to kind of re-enter and reassess how that's going to impact your life now as you return.
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting though, because I'm thinking of one young man I know who went to Uganda a couple of times in that case, and the first time he said, we all walked about and said, isn't it brilliant, these lovely people, they're so welcoming, they're so kind, they've shown us their houses, we've seen this, we've been down the town, we've done this and that. When he came back the second time, a couple of years later, he said afterwards, I realised that there was an awful lot I hadn't been seeing, and I understood a lot more. Now, inevitably, I imagine he'd matured a bit, but that learning process can take time and has to be, in some ways, as immersive as you can manage whether you can travel or not. And I guess that can be difficult or it can be easy depending on your view and how adventurous you are and how much resource you have. On that point, I want to hear very quickly from a gentleman called Stephen Ruzaza. Now, he, in this case, is the diocesan secretary in Muhabura, that diocese that Knock had the partnership with. But I was chatting to him in January and I asked about that relationship. Here's what he said.
Oh yes, interaction, coming to know, knowing each other's cultures, sharing the love of Christ, very enormous. The way we present the gospel of Christ, the way we have different way of looking at things globally, but unity in Christ, very wonderful.
You can hear that enthusiasm and experience in Stephen Ruzaza's voice. It's those sort of friendships and relationships that really make your work worthwhile, isn't it?
I think, first of all, there's something really amazing about creating a friendship, not just this kind of transactional relationship, and having an interest in each other's daily lives, because at the end of the day, there is that recognition that we are all part of the same vision, the same mission, and we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. And that's kind of at the starting point of that relationship. And we're sharing out of that, which is just really lovely to see that unfold.
Yeah, I've been in Stephen's house a couple of times and with his wife, Peace, who's a very successful secondary head teacher as well. So they're a thoughtful family, but I get WhatsApps whenever one of the kids has graduated or got married or there's a grandchild arrived or something. And it could be someone down the road in the Mournes or up in the North Coast or in Dublin or in London or wherever, but it's someone just in rural Uganda as it happens. But I find it fascinating on WhatsApp to see someone 4,000 miles away and WhatsApp says typing, and I'm thinking he's doing that right now. Mm-hmm. Those relationships, are you finding in other churches, Chris, that people come and say, we never expected this is different, it was we gave you money, we got a prayer report back, but now we have this completely different thing?
Yes, and relationships is key in it. A few months ago we brought our colleague Emmanuel Marangir. You'll hear him in a few moments. He is Tearfund's country director in Rwanda. He's been back and forth to Northern Ireland more than 10 times over the last decade, and the relationship he has developed with church leaders and with others who are now friends, and as you've said, Will, there's WhatsApps and sharing life over the long term. For me personally, bringing him over a number of times, introducing them to my family, having around my kitchen table with my kids who are in primary school is a real rich experience for them. So even just personally as a family, that brings me real a real joy.
Mm-hmm.
You've brought back a memory for Lois and me, because we sat opposite Emmanuel in a very nice restaurant over tea and coffee in January in Kigali in Rwanda. And we asked him about partnerships, how you start them, and something we will think about as well. Do they go on forever or not? Of course they don't. So how do you think about the length of the partnership and how you finish it? Here's Emmanuel.
It has a great impact. The church has resources that it does not have. And those resources are actually immediately put to use. And they are life-changing resources in the sense that people are able to engage in life-transforming work. Most of the churches we have partnered with and have worked with in Northern Ireland have found great benefit in the partnership that they have had, and especially in the learning that they have taken away. We start with the end in mind. What do we really want to get out of this, and how does it look like? When will our mission work be done?
Chris, you recently took over as the Northern Ireland Director of Tearfund. How do you end up taking on that role? Tell us a wee bit about yourself.
So I've been part of the Tearfund team for over 3 years now, and originally I was overseeing some of these partnerships, which gave me really good insight into what's so core for Tearfund in Northern Ireland is our strength, the strength of our church connections and our connection with ordinary supporters. So I had the privilege then of being able to step into this role at the end of last year. I guess if I look back over my working life, I've worked for a couple of different churches in youth ministry, and then a couple of different agencies, a bit like Tearfund. And the core of those things has always been that the church is God's plan A for the world, and I've said that already today. But it needs the support of agencies like Tearfund, who lovingly and I would say prophetically remind them about those on the margins. So whether that's young people here who are hanging about outside your church building, whether it's people here in prison here in Northern Ireland, whether it's the poor here in Northern Ireland or the global poor, I think folk like Tearfund have this obligation to just help the church see those that can very easily become invisible. So for me, Tearfund has joined those two things. The church is central, and the church needs to be for the margins. If it's not for the margins, then it's only doing half of the job that Christ called us to. So it's a real joy to lead the team here.
As I am sitting here listening to you, your eyes are lighting up, and I can see that that's what really gives you that real zest for life. That just is what God has put in your heart. Tell us a wee bit about your faith story.
So I had the privilege of growing up in a Christian home. So my mum and dad are Christians, and that was part of the air that we were breathing. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I understood that I had an obligation to respond to Christ myself. But it has always been that a faith without action is dead. And I guess in Northern Ireland we have a history of faith not always doing good. And I am really convinced that we are good news people. And that if we're not good news people for our neighbour and our global neighbour, then we're not good news people. So the good news is good news, and we have an obligation to make sure people know it's good news. And obviously part of that is by proclamation, but it goes hand in hand with demonstration. And that's, now that you've said that, that's a core thing through my life, yeah. Mm-hmm. So Tearfund is a wonderful, deeply theological, deeply prayerful organisation. It's deeply Christ-centred, right from the very top to the bottom, and that's a real privilege. And I don't take that for granted, because not every Christian gets to work in a place where they can pray. Mm-hmm. So we meet regularly through the week, both as a small team here in Northern Ireland and as a global body, to pray. So, I mean, sometimes I sit at home in at my work desk in the office or in my study at home, and I'm on a call with 40 or 50 of my colleagues, literally from every continent in the world. And we might be talking business, but we're also praying. And that's pinch myself moments.
Mm-hmm. Lois, is that all true?
I can vouch.
What about your own journey to doing this in Tearfund? Now, as I've said before, I know you a little bit because we've been to Uganda on the same trip and travelled a few thousand miles as part of the same group. But Why do you like doing it? Why do you want to do it?
First of all, that kind of passion again for the local church. I think there's just something really exciting about the local church and the transformational power that it has. And I've always kind of been a bit intrigued by that vision of the early church in Acts, when it talks about them sharing with one another, meeting everyone's need, and then seeing that grow. And I just think it's exciting that we are part of this vessel of transformation, both here locally and globally. And we have the opportunity now in this role, I have the opportunity to help churches here in Northern Ireland be excited about that for themselves, but also for the transformational power that they can then be part of that around the world. When I was a student is when I first engaged with Tearfund. I was a geography student and had a great interest in global poverty and looking specifically at that, and that's how then Tearfund really helped me marry that together with my faith and see actually that God has a huge heart for the poor, and he gives us that heart too. And it was really wonderful to be able to bring those two things together and know that this is part of kind of my mandate to be part of this work in that capacity as well.
God never ceases to amaze me how he works in our lives and just how he knits everything together. It's so good to hear that.
It's almost like he's all-knowing, all-powerful.
Just a bit.
Lois, you engage with supporters and with churches. Northern Ireland is a very traditional place, very conservative place. Yes, it's changing, and it has changed, and socially it's changing. We've talked a lot about this in podcasts like this, not least when we had Avril in a couple of times ago and we were chatting about welcoming the stranger. When you say the way you support overseas and the way we think it's best to do things isn't the way you've traditionally done things, you must encounter a reluctance. No, can we not just build a primary school? Can we not just buy them a goat? Can we not just send the money and we don't want to have to actually chat to anyone? How do you get past that?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think there's a challenge of mindset for sure, from everything being done out of these great intentions. But just Tearfund's been working in development work for over 50 years. And with that has come a great wealth of experience of what makes effective alleviating people from poverty in an effective way. And that is why we work through the church, because we do know that that can have a long-lasting impact. But at the heart of that is enabling people to have that whole life transformation and that mindset change. And part of that is helping people to see where their identity lies, where their purpose lies, and them to really pull together as a community and work from that, identifying what has been given to them by God. And that is just such a full process. And so helping churches to engage with that, which is the same process that they're hoping those in their own local communities can engage with, will really bring transformation for the long term. And it's the sustainability plan, as I said before, working through the church is the sustainability plan. So once Tearfund exits, or a programme that's being run, or a building project, the church is still there, and those principles are all still there, and the Bible is still there to bring people on.
It's really about changing people's perspective and thoughts on things now, because life has just moved on so much from 20 years ago. And so it's really, I suppose, trying to show people that Tearfund really have a worthwhile reason for being here, but we're doing it in a different way to maybe how we used to.
Which is why the connection's so important. It's very hard to give some money and forget about a person if you've seen their face, or if you've spoken to them, or if you've
sat in their house.
Which not everybody can do, but hear a story, see a face, hear a voice, join a call online. The person becomes real, and it's no longer acceptable to just write a check. We'll take a check and we'll make it work and multiply it, but that's not enough anymore when you're connected to somebody. And ultimately in Christ we're connected to all of these people, whether we know them or not. There's richness with that.
I suspect what you two are talking about is chiming with a lot of people listening, but also they know they are faith communities with a finite set of resources, a finite number of people, and they're thinking, I don't want to get in and create expectation that I'm going to be there forever and spend a fortune helping people out and helping them lift themselves out of poverty. How do you make this be a finite thing that people say, we'll do this for a bit and see how it works, without a commitment that might frighten them away?
Yeah, that's really important, because that dependency creating aid is is part of the problem that we've tried to move away from. And some of that learning that Tearfund's had over 50 years is about how to do that more effectively, because that is the opposite of life-giving, localised, self-sufficient change. So it's really important, as Emmanuel said, to understand at the beginning what the end looks like. What are some of the learnings that we want to get here? What are some of the things we want to achieve in partnership with our friends and colleagues around the world? So the connection has to inspire sustainability, and the model that Tearfund works in itself, which is training and energising local people to bring that change, means it's already on a sustainable footing. There's more work to do to make sure that the dependency doesn't creep in, but the model itself is one of empowering and giving people the dignity and honour to lift themselves out of poverty. We are there as partners rather than as overlords.
Lois, we've talked about Africa a lot because that's just the example we had. It's not just Africa, is it?
As Chris has mentioned, Tearfund works in over 50 countries around the world. So, of course, Africa is a huge part of that. But we also work in South America and the Middle East. And that's not forgetting Asia as well.
Thinking about Northern Ireland, when we look at how our own culture is changing, and recently we talked about how we had interviewed Avril from Acacia Path, and there's so many asylum seekers and refugees. So you're dealing with people from so many cultures. How can Tearfund actually help the poverty that the people that are coming to our country now are finding themselves in?
So Tearfund's calling is to follow Jesus where the need is greatest. Now, as I said at church, that doesn't mean there's not need right across the street from where you live. But our unique calling within the kingdom is to go to places where the need is most significant. So there's wonderful partners and agencies and churches here that are uniquely called to serve the poor and those living with poverty here in Northern Ireland. I think Tearfund's unique contribution here is what we've talked about, that when you connect with people living in poverty overseas and you connect with good development practice through partners overseas, it changes how you view poverty here. And so you can't anymore just put a table out with food out the front of your door and say, great, come and get what you want and then go away again. All of a sudden you would view the people on your doorstep as people with a holistic range of needs with which the gospel speaks into a lot of them. And the church's obligation then is elevated. So it changes how we do the work of local poverty alleviation, because our mindset has shifted about what's important.
Mm-hmm.
When you finish the way you talk to churches, the way you explain all this to them, and they're going, oh, I don't know, is this us? What is it you say to folk to say, yeah, this is you, this could be you, and in many ways a partnership like this kind of should be you?
It's always at the heart of it to go back to the church's vision as a church and what the calling of the church is to be transformational centres, which is what we as Tearfund are looking towards, the church being transformational centres where they are placed and the ways in which they can do that. And I think this is a real opportunity to go where places and deal with issues that you can't easily go to, but we can offer that relationship and that opportunity to work closely and walk alongside those that are part of the global church that we do share the same faith with, and help those churches be transformational centres where they're at. And so it's a really an opportunity to walk alongside the church as it acts globally.
Chris?
I think what excites me is what a partnership, what giving to international need does in us. So church leaders here want to see their people grow in Christ, to be discipled and to disciple others. And this stuff that we've talked about is part of that, because it grows our heart, it tunes our heart in towards others. And that is certainly one definition of discipleship. Our hearts are tuned towards God and tuned towards others. So there's all this other stuff around impact and around seeing change and transformation, but actually for a local church leader who wants their congregation to grow, this stuff is part of what helps people grow in Christ, and that's what gets me excited.
Lois, Chris, thank you very much, both of you, for explaining what you do. I'm glad you do, because I've been to Uganda 3 times, met some amazing people, been humbled, been taught, been schooled occasionally, and had to have a long chat with myself, been breathless with the altitude up a mountain or two, sat with and learned from people who have very little, or in a couple of cases, precisely nothing. So thank you very much.
And thank you. It's been really lovely to meet you this morning and to just chat through the work of Tearfund, and I hope it really challenges people out there to rethink again.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Tearfund.org to find out more about the work Chris and Lois do. There's a Tearfund NI Facebook page, which has some very fascinating videos with Lois chatting to people on them. Go and check it out.
Yes, and thanks for listening. We're made at the studios of Commission Christian Radio in Dundonald. Check us out at commissionradio.org, and why not press that follow on or subscribe button if you haven't already. And that way you'll never miss an episode.
And if you enjoy what we do, why not think of 2 or 3 friends who you think who'd enjoy it too? Make a point of telling them about it. Sometimes, people just hand me their phones. I open up the podcast app, look up the commission files and hit follow or subscribe for them. That's them joining us. Why don't you do that? I always hand the phone back. I always hand the phone back.
That's good to hear, back.
So
that's good
make
to
sure
hear,
you
Will.
do that as well.
And don't forget Commission's other podcast, the sister series to this one, Commission Radio Drama, where you can hear the stories from the Bible dramatised. Local writers, actors and producers and all the plays are recorded and produced here. And you might even recognise a few voices.
There's a massive hint for you. Well, it's next door in Studio 1 where it happens. The big one, the head of programmes, lets us into Kerry if we've been good.
It does happen sometimes. There'll be a new drama series every month, so do encourage others to listen to that, and do keep enjoying your summer, especially when you see the sun. Well, see you soon. Bye.
Bye.